Good morning. I am Dr. Joan Francesc Fondevila Gascon from Universitat Abat Oliba CEU in Barcelona, Spain, and I am explaining to you the proposal about the use of social networks and social media to the implementation of classes. We have to consider in the broadband society environment we need to introduce e-learning in the practice of each day or the day trading activity for students, including the presential activity. For these students, it's very used to introduce contents in social networks, and in our group of research about digital journalism and broadband, we are considering this item, this issue, like a very important and main feature to study. We have analyzed, thanks to a quantitative methodology with a survey, the use of Facebook and Twitter from students in a presential environment. We can consider it also in a virtual university, but in our case is presential or a blended mixed university. It is the reason we try to analyze the possible use in a prospective perspective of these social networks. And in general, results are very good. The students involved in this survey are students with technological skills, but we will do in the future new studies with the students of other areas, but the area is social sciences area. Then they consider very interesting to use these social networks more or less in the same way, Facebook and Twitter. Twitter more for fast messages into the class, but considering the danger that implicates these messages in this procedure. One consideration is the obligation of the professor to be involved in this activity, and we have to do courses for professors, depending on the age and on the technological skills, to introduce them to use Twitter. And also to establish a differentiation between the personal Twitter account and the professional Twitter account, for example. And the introduction of Twitter was considered during the class. In the case of Facebook, we find another possible activities, for example, transference of acknowledgement. If a professor writes an article, a scientific article, or an article in a newspaper or in a scientific blog, for example, it's possible to introduce it in Facebook in parallel with the introduction on the Moodle, because of, in our university, we have also Moodle. But the idea is to establish dynamics of participation in social networks with the professor. We find in the results a double degree of relationship, one not hierarchical, in this case, for example, a student with a student, and another one with a pyramidal structure from a student to professor, or professor a student, top down or bottom up. It depends, it's not the matter. In this case, the key factor is the speed of answer from the student or from the professor. Although in the case of Facebook, the speed is not as rapid as in the case of Twitter. Ideas in the qualitative view, in the quantitative part we did a Likert scale, and in general the score is very high for this introduction. And in the case of the qualitative part, the students are focused in the contents introduced by the professor, and they consider they can introduce also contents. But the idea to create groups to analyze questions of each class. The class explained each season, each day, and the idea is to introduce contents, references or articles to reinforce the contents of the matter. And taking in consideration the Bologna schedule, trying to establish evidences of activity, it's interesting to use these social networks, but linking it and establishing a backup system to conserve the content generated, because it's a debate which is linked to our study. If we create a double point to introduce contents, for example, Facebook and Twitter, perhaps Moodle would be in diminuendo. It's a danger, a possible trouble we find. And in general, we also consider two kinds of contents or relationship. One in a logistic way, in the sense of assignments, of exercises to solve, and the second one in a contents phase, in a contents side. And in both ways, we can consider applications from these social networks. In sum, we consider we have to introduce smoothly, slowly, these social networks in the class activity, in a controlled way, in the best sense of control, and to do research about how this introduction is done. And it's the conclusion of our study. Thank you very much, and see you from Barcelona.